Welcome to this afternoon's conversation on hiring international students. I'm very excited to be hosting this amazing group of women up here to hear perspectives from the state, the industry, community partners, and leaders on how the specific diverse community can be a resource for Maine and for our employers. My name is Kate Howell. I'm the Director of Workforce Partnerships at Educate Maine. I know many of you in the audience. I see a lot of familiar faces. Educate Maine is a statewide business-led education nonprofit. We are dedicated to aligning and advancing education and workforce partnerships and supporting educational and career attainment. I lead several initiatives that work with students, including some international students. And so this is a very exciting panel for me. I don't have bios for everyone, but I believe it's better for people to introduce themselves. So I'm going to let our panelists do that, and we'll start just to kind of set the stage for all of this. Just obviously name, title, organization, of which some of you have more than one, and kind of what is your involvement with international hiring, international students in your personal and professional life right now?
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Kay. I'm the program manager for the Maine Career Exploration Program out of the Department of Economic and Community Development for the state. So with the Maine Career Exploration Program, we are providing short-term paid internships, but also career exploration, job shadow, and all sorts of opportunities connecting young people from their aspiration truly to that opportunity for them. So with that, we have a lot of young people within the high school realm who are exploring careers in a new place for the first time. And so finding that connection and finding that opportunity for young people to see themselves within their communities and see themselves potentially within a specific industry is really all what we're working on.
Great, thank you. Hi, good afternoon. Masa al khair to those who speak Arabic in the room. My name is Ikhlas Ahmed. I am originally from Sudan. I've been a proud Mainer since my family was resettled here by the United Nations around 2007. I went an alum of Casco Bay High School, so I always like to talk in my identity. I like to mention my high school. I also went to USM for my undergraduate and graduate degree in education. I've been a classroom teacher for the past 8 years, and then recently kind of moved on from education, and now I co-direct the Cultural Alliance of Maine, which is an art and cultural advocacy organization in advocating for more funding to hire more diverse candidates here for us in Maine. I also lead Chance to Advance, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to uplifting voices of immigrant and refugees, and a lot of our Mainers who are doing amazing work here in Maine. But I'll talk about that question in a little bit. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Drabecki. I'm a partner at Dentons, which is a relatively new to the area law firm. We're a global firm with very many attorneys, but here in Portland, we've got about 8. And my practice focuses on mostly employment-based immigration. So temporary workers all the way through the green card process and through naturalization. So my involvement with hiring international students starts with either students who contact me or employers who are looking to hire foreign national students coming out of any of the universities across the country.
Thank you, everyone. Oops. My name is Diana LeBlanc, or Diana in English. I am the Talent and Diversity Manager for Coastal Enterprises, Inc., or CEI. And how my job there is to do talent acquisition and talent development, and I work with interns and justice fellows. And the reason I am connected to this topic somehow, one, because once upon a time I was an international student myself, and my background was also in higher education. I worked at Kansas State University, so super familiar with like international students and kind of a little bit of kind of that dynamics. And before that, after that, Bangor Savings Bank, and now CEI. So somehow I've always had some sort of involvement or knowledge, a little bit of knowledge on that topic. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So I'm really excited about this conversation because I think even just the introductions have kind of shown a light on what international students can mean, because there's so many different versions of what that is, from high school students and recent immigrants and refugees to college students who may be from abroad and have chosen Maine. And we'd like to claim them because we really need more people. And we keep talking about that over the past 3 days. So how can we claim them so that they claim us? Something I heard yesterday from one of our panelists and loved it. All the way to, folks who are graduating and actively just seeking employment, to employers in the audience who want to go seek them, right? So wanted to just set that stage to say it can mean a lot of different things, and we're going to talk about it in a lot of different ways today. One of the reasons I'm excited for this is that we're going to hopefully walk away with some really clear action items for people. There's lots of excitement that can happen. I know for myself, there's like 80 different partnerships and people I need to follow up with, and so many things I want to do after the last 3 days. And then it's going to be Monday, and I'm not going to know my first step to take, right? And I'm going to pick and I'm going to choose, and where I feel the most comfortable is where I'm going to head. So hopefully we're going to make everybody in this room more comfortable with hiring international students. So as I thought about this panel and what I was going to ask these folks and talk to Hamza a little bit about it, I thought, well, I want everybody to come to this from a place of possibilities and like, yeah, I can do that. I think if you're in the room, you're already thinking about it, you think it's a good idea, maybe you're going to hear some steps that you could take, but could take and will take are two different things. So, or feel that you can take in your organization, right? Do you have the power to do that? Do you have the understanding and the skills of what it's going to take to make it happen? And so wanted to kind of start with that, with a little bit of kind of like myth busting, is I asked some people, what might you or your organization say as like a reason you might hesitate? And what I heard was all barriers in the organization and nothing at all to do with students. So I thought we'll start there. So some of the things I heard was it's too complicated, it's too expensive, doesn't help us long term. And so wanted to kind of start the conversation there. So Diane, I'm gonna go to you first with, it's complicated, true or false?
It's totally false. For two reasons. One, because we have people like Katie and I'm thinking about work, academic advisors and international students office at universities and colleges and campuses, that they already have all that info. All you have to do is sign a paper, like a second page of a paper, and date it. That's literally all you have to do, because the financial institutions and again, organizations like Kate's are doing all the work for you as an employer. So just saying, it's not really that hard.
I'll echo that. It can certainly seem scary and burdensome. And I always say that the first one's the hardest because you're just not sure about the process and who needs to be doing what. But to echo your point, the academic advisors at the universities are invaluable resources. They know what they're doing. They know who to go to. They understand the students' anxieties and can be very, very helpful. And yeah, hiring students who have their work authorization is truly that easy.
So Kate, I'm going to stay with you for a second and say, if someone in the audience is thinking about hiring someone, sometimes you just have to know, like, high level, like what, like you're saying it's easy, but like what are the steps? Like if they're thinking about trying to put together a strategy, they're thinking they might call you or someone like you to help them figure it out. Like, what are the first couple of things that are going to need to happen so that they kind of like know the path?
Sure. So when you are recruiting for a position and you find an international student who is applied for your position, you're happy about it, the first thing that you can ask is, are you work authorized in the United States? You are allowed to ask that question. There's some parameters around how far you can go with that question, but you are allowed to ask, are you work authorized? The student will hopefully say yes and be able to provide you with paperwork showing that they are work authorized. Once they show you that paperwork, they're onboarded just like any other employee.
So that does sound easy. So
It's pretty easy.
we're moving forward.
I can usually
not-
complicate things, but I can't even complicate this one.
And I have been reminded that we have to give the caveat that Kate is not giving any legal advice today. She's just sharing her experiences. I was promised if she sat on the panel, I wouldn't make her give us legal advice.
Thank you.
Okay. So, so kind of going along with that, is it expensive, right? Because if they have a student authorization, that's one piece. Long term, they might need sponsorship for a visa. I think that can be a barrier in some employers' minds, but what is that true cost? Like, we all spend a lot of money on recruiting, right? So how much are we really adding to a budget?
I'm not going to pretend to be able to do lawyer math up here because I can't. But when you're hiring a student, again, there's no cost. They're work authorized incident to there being enough one student. Every student who graduates from a U.S. university from a bachelor's degree program or higher gets 1 year of work authorization, no matter what. And if they've graduated from a STEM program, they get an additional 2 years of work authorization. There is a training plan that goes along with that, but that's very, very straightforward. And again, it has no cost. Long term, though, depending on the visa category, there are different filing fees depending on the category, which just went up April 1st significantly, to be honest. But there are discounts for employers who are fewer than 25 employees, so they pay half the cost and are exempt from a couple of the other fees. So for example, for an employer of more than 50 or of 25 employees to file an H-1B visa, you'd be looking at probably about $3,000 in filing fees, and about half that for an employer of fewer than 25. And again, I did lawyer math right now, so don't write that down. For other visa categories, though, like if you find a Canadian citizen or a Canadian student, though there is no filing fee because they can apply directly at the border, and it's just a matter of putting together their application that they present directly at the border. So a typical lawyer answer, it depends.
Fair. But I've spent more than $3,000 recruiting before. Diana, have you?
Yes, of course, especially if you hire like a search firm.
Yeah.
They're gonna charge you, what, 25% of their
Yeah.
1 year salary? So yeah, definitely.
That's a lot higher than $3,000, no
Yeah.
matter what job you're paying for.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So now we've made it possible, right? Like those are all things you can build into your budget. So want to talk a little bit more about the benefits that it brings, right? Like how do these students really bring value to the organization? So Ikhlas, I'm going to go to you first.
And I wanted to just also go back a little bit and talk about the difficulty of hiring international students or just bringing international students. And you guys are going to get an honest answer from me. Like those who know me, I don't prepare speeches whenever I'm on a panel. So I'm just going to be real. I think for me, when I was at Casco Bay High School, it started with intentional, like my teachers were intentional that it's a very predominantly white school. And they said, look at this room. It's not diverse. And what can we do about it? So I think I want to just talk about that point, that when people say it's difficult, it's not difficult. It starts with intentions. If the intention is to hire more diverse students or to bring more diversity, is to name that and put it on the table and then take small actions in doing that. So at my high school, my principal, when he noticed that, oh, our school is very white, what can we do? How can we make Casco Bay High School a more interesting student for a BIPOC person? Then, the conversation started there. So that's where I want to start first. And then, taking away the financial part of it, before the financial, a lot of students have tests that they have to pass in order for them to be able to be accepted into the US. And sometimes those tests don't even really mean anything. They don't determine so much. So even just limiting those obstacles that make it harder for students to be accepted coming to the US, if it's a test that is it really, really necessary? So making sure that the credentials that they need is not it's not 20, maybe it's just 5. So that's an aspect that I like to talk about a lot. And then, and then the financial aspect of it, is something that has prevented a lot of people that I know from so many different parts of the world that want to come and go to SMCC, go to USM, go to our universities and bring the richness that they carry here to our state, which really is something that we need. So in answering the question about benefits, I think international students bring so many beautiful things that they carry with them in terms of language. And I know in the US, English is the only language we speak, but just growing up in Portland and going to Portland High School, there were 100 languages spoken in one high school. So even using that diversity of languages has been so amazing to have here in Maine. In talking about the food that we really desperately love here in New England. So the richness of that they bring is not just in terms of the knowledge, but the traditions and the cultures that I feel like it has really been why I have stayed here in Maine and what I want to continue to bring here in Maine. And I know that international students will bring that, the language, the food, the aspect of different perspective from around the world that will make the fabric of Maine even more richer.
Thank you. So Kay, I want to ask you kind of like a double-edged question. So first, talk a little bit about what employers can do in support of the high school students that you work with, and then a little bit more about how having that richer, more diverse, international student aspect at a higher level can help with like mentorship of those students and like how that bridge kind of works and some of the things you've seen.
Absolutely. So thinking to your first question, more so of what can you do to get more high school students involved, is really how is your business already kind of feeding into your local high schools, community-based organizations that serve young people, and what are you doing there? Are you creating extended learning opportunities where young people are coming out of the classroom and potentially getting academic credit, whether it's a core credit, maybe it's science? As somebody who taught an alternative ed for a little over 6 years, it's really like my heart and soul of trying to pair both what is my academic credit and then how am I trying to make this hands-on as possible. So I had a lot of young people who were new Mainers within my classroom who were working with me in the gardens and kind of creating that both science and whatever it may be elective. But then on top of that, finding a business who also does something similar and connecting them to that piece and that young person understanding I have this transferable skill that this employer desires. I have this transferable skill that is, something of value in multiple places. And how are we working that within our schools? Another aspect with the community-based organizations that serve young people is they may have a workforce development program or they may have a mentorship program. Sitting down with somebody who has a similar lived experience with you or has a similar pathway, who can understand and empathize and help to understand this, what can be a really overwhelming time of trying to figure out what is my next step, where can I go, what is available to me, is really getting at that second part of your question of what is the next step past that? Or if your business or your organization doesn't have capacity to host young people for a job shadow or to do a project-based learning, maybe with one of your English language learning classrooms, what can you do, which it is always that mentorship? Can you find that community connection for that young person to see themselves there? And that makes a huge difference. And that's a huge benefit to the employer as well, because you're tapping into that school system, you're tapping into that youth serving community-based organization, and you're building that relationship, and then y'all become the champions of that. You can take that even further than just those extended learning opportunities, and you can take that past those internships. You can turn that into a true network for that young person to feel seen and understood and heard and really feel that sense of belonging, not just in their community, but now connected to this next piece.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So I'll ask Diana and Kate if you have anything to add in that. I know, Diana, you work a lot with internships, whether international or diverse populations. Like what have you seen and experienced? What have you done as an HR professional that might have helped support creating that environment so that you can kind of work with those students?
Awesome, thank you. Well, there is one exercise that we do about cultural competency. So before we're going to welcome someone from a different country, and the hiring manager and the immediate team of that intern or employee, they have to do research on that place.
I love that.
So they have to do research specifically, like it's not the same thing that you come from a big city in Rwanda or from the rural area of Rwanda. It makes a huge difference. And so they have to do very specific research because just because you know someone from one country doesn't mean that person represents the entire culture of the country, correct? Yes. And so I give them as much information as possible. And so we do research about the food, the traditional foods, traditional music, dresses, gastronomy, perhaps if there are special items of the culture. We even research if it's, so I'm from Colombia, for example, and and I don't like summer. I do not like summertime. And so everyone is like, well, aren't you from Colombia? Every time. Why? Because everybody thinks that Colombia is hot. But I'm from the mountains of Colombia, 8,000 feet of elevation. There is no heat or humidity up there. So we even researched the geographic location to stop asking those questions. Well, aren't you from somewhere? And like, aren't you supposed to like this or that? So we do that exercise research. And so we all get together for 1 hour. And it's like, okay, everybody right now is going to go to Google and we're going to research this and that and that. And we do that for people who come from different countries just to get before they arrive to the organization. I actually learned that from Mandy Levine, wonderful friend and colleague and professional, and that she calls that cultural competency. Well, you know, we don't get Mandy to do the whole thing. We do just a little piece of just doing research of our own.
I think that sounds fun, but I
It's
love learning.
fun.
Like, how has that been received in your organization if people are thinking about doing it? Because it could make you uncomfortable, right? Like you're gonna smash down some things that you might think that you knew, all kinds of, how has it been received with your employees?
It's been received really well so far, just because we all do it together and everybody has to say something. I think that the biggest part for me to want to do that is for people to have something smart to say. And, oh, I read about your country and I read that, I love when people refer to, if you're talking to me, I love it when you talk about the nice things about it. Oh, yes, one of the exercises that we do is we're going to look for positive information about the country, because if you go online, all you're going to get is the worst news about the country. So go to online to see Colombia right now, and you will read just all the terrible things that are happening in Colombia. But very few people are able to tell me, oh, I read your cyclists are really good, or I read your coffee is the best in the world, or I read you are the biggest flour importer or exporter to the US or something like that. Nobody ever tells me like positive stuff. So they're not allowed to look for bad news. They have to look for good news and facts about the country.
I love that. So I'm just gonna, this wasn't even on my list. Now I'm gonna ask the rest of our panel, is there other steps that you've seen people take, I'm gonna call them activities that you've seen be successful or positive, mentorship or other pieces that you could share with this organization, with this group that they might be able to take back with them, that they could implement right away, really easy kind of things?
I've worked with a couple organizations that when they're onboarding a new student, they take the time to learn how to say, hello, how are you, in the language of that student. So it's just that first interaction. And sometimes we're not, quite getting the words quite right, but taking the time to work through that and taking the time to be able to mutually say, hello, how are you, within your own language, and then respond back, I'm good, or I'm okay. I just spent, most of the month of April in Spain. And so getting to take the time to be able to have a casual conversation. I also studied abroad there at another time. I also studied abroad in Prague, and I studied abroad in a couple other countries, but getting that chance to say, hello, how are you? And just to start your day that way for some young people has been really great. And then for the employer to say like, hey, so why haven't we been doing this the whole time? Or, oh, that felt really like a good entry step. And for the young people to come into an organization where multiple people who may not work with them on the same team because they're not doing the same project, but will still be able to say, hello, how are you? That makes a huge difference to some of those young folks. I know for some young people, they really love to be able to bring in their cultural food for lunch. And so understanding that everybody's food is going to look differently and to understand that sharing meals in a lot of other countries is a very intimate thing. It is in my own culture, it is in a lot of other cultures, and being able to share your meal as it is and someone not asking questions of, oh, what is that? Or, well, that smells different or whatever it may be, but accepting that everybody is nourishing their body and everybody is bringing a little piece of themselves, an authentic piece of themselves, really can make a huge difference as well.
Absolutely. And one initiative that I've seen or I've used myself that has been very successful is just to know, beside, the food is the local markets, right? Like local markets and where they exist, that helps a lot. And sports, I worked with a lot of students that have, soccer players or whatever sport that they used to practice back home. So just doing a little bit of research and knowing if there's a team that exists nearby that they can continue that sport, or maybe it's a space for them to find new friends and a new community in a place that they're not familiar with. And third would be like a place for practicing faith. I know that here in the US, it's almost like a taboo topic. Let's not talk about religion. But I think for me, I worked with a lot of Muslim students and they really needed to know where the mosque is. Where is the closest local mosque? So being able to know where the mosque is or churches. I've worked with a lot of people from Ghana who they're Christian. And if for me, even as a Muslim person, if I didn't research to find out where the church is, I just couldn't have been helpful to that individual. So just learning, simple places where it might be helpful for that individual.
So I want to talk a little bit more about kind of supportive services, both for the business and for the students, so that everyone has what they need to help themselves, the organization, everyone be successful. So I want to talk about that from like a legal standpoint, like what resources are out there from an HR standpoint, and then also from a student services. What chance to advance, some other things that are out there that may or may not be related directly to their job, but is directly related to their professional self, right? So just wanted to kind of ask this group about the different organizations and different access points that you are either involved in or that you're aware of that this group might be able to take advantage of.
I mean, from my biggest resource is just the universities, the academic advisors, and the international student offices of each university. That's my go-to, just because they do that every day. And so they have so much knowledge on the forms and the things that we need to file. And the students really rely on them. And they become some sort of a guide, like step 1, do this, step 2. And so they have really become my lifeline. And I trust what they are saying. But perhaps another resource, if you have any summer interns, Main Career Catalyst, huge.
Thanks. Thanks for the plug.
No, I'm serious. I mean, just an opportunity to connect, to network, to talk about professional development, to do these different things. Why not? And it's there, and it's a great resource for many employers. So, yes.
So thanks again for the shout out. It is a group that I and John, who's waving and excited about it. But we work with 400 to 500 students every summer, hundreds of employers across the state. So it is a really diverse group of students. And we do engage a lot of international. So thank you.
I would say also, in addition to the universities and the DSOs there, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services website is generally pretty informative. But one thing that I would caution you and your potential students to stay away from are some of the forums. It's the internet, so there's a lot of bad information out there. So I always caution people to just be careful of those. There are things that look very factual and very real that aren't necessarily. And of course, you can always find a licensed immigration provider to answer some of your questions as well. Most attorneys will at least meet with you on a consult basis, and you can ask your questions, and it doesn't necessarily need to lead to a legal engagement or anything like that, but you could at least get some of your questions answered on a consult basis. I think most attorneys would do that.
So Kate, in your role, I know you mentioned you work with individuals, you also work with businesses. Is that just when they have someone that they're ready to hire, or they're thinking about hiring, or do you, or are there other attorneys who might work on more of like a strategy, like we're thinking we want to be better at this. What do we need to do internally to make that happen from a legal standpoint?
That's a really good question. Thank you. Yes, we absolutely work on counsel and strategy with, even helping figure out where to recruit for some of our clients that would lead to, the best talent that they can find, and then turning that into an immigration or a mobility strategy going forward. We also help with, I-9 and workforce compliance. That's an important piece of this too, that gets easily overlooked when you're used to having a US citizen workforce. It's easy to forget about the fact that you do need to keep up with those I-9s and make sure that your employees are maintaining their work authorization.
Great, thank you. Klaus. Okay.
I think also in terms of resources, thinking about within the school systems, a lot of school systems may have a multicultural center, really making sure to know the folks that are there, get to know some of the parent liaisons that are there, get to know some of the folks who are doing some of your translation services, and really trying to learn and participate within the community within some capacity there. Your schools are full of so many resources, and especially for our students that will need additional accommodations and things like that to make some of these things work, really tapping into your schools because they do have so many of those resources. And then also too, I'm happy for Career Exploration to be a part of this in any way that it's possible. But thinking about your network, you likely have somebody who you can start this conversation with. You can also work together to try to work with the schools to utilize their resources so you don't feel like you're doing this by yourself. And then also too, there are so many multicultural nights that happen within a lot of the schools. So participate. There's always amazing food. There's always going to be really fun activities happening. I just went to an amazing multicultural night and it was probably my favorite thing because all we did was dance and eat. That's really all we're looking to do most of the time is really just dance and eat, because bringing food together and people together and music together, that's incredible and a great way to get to know a culture and a great way to get to know your community. But reiterating again, the multicultural centers within the schools can be an amazing resource for you. And you likely have somebody within your network who you can reach out to who is also navigating this as well.
So I'm gonna call on Ekhlas a little bit and ask it to share a little bit more about Chance to Advance, because I think some of the resources that you're able to offer within that can be something that employers could think about, but also just to know that those pieces exist for students who might be looking to professionally develop themselves and understand more about what's going on in different communities and things like that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the reason why even Chance to Advance started as a nonprofit was because I felt like there wasn't a unified place where I can go ask for resources. So that's one thing. As much as I love that the resources that exist here, I wish I knew if it was just a tap away and I can get access to them. So we need to do better as a community here in Maine to make it easy to access information. But for me, the resources that I provide, I have through Chance to Advance provided for some students, is to just give them a platform, first of all, to be to be a student, to ask questions, to talk about their dreams, and seeing who I know in my circle that can be a mentor to them, to help them throughout that college experience or university experience. We celebrate voices through an annual calendar project called Celebrating Diversity. And that calendar, we through numerous of donors have been in almost every classroom in Maine public school system, which has been really awesome to spread the diversity that way. And then the proceeds of our calendars have been used as a platform for financial assistance for many immigrants and refugees. So that's something that alone as a researcher just providing, and it's not a lot of money. It's $1,000 or $2,000 per students that we have helped so far. But even that in helping with, books and making sure they have access to money for gas to get to the class on time, or money to go to the local grocery store where they shop to get the things that, they haven't been able to. So those kind of resources, I feel like, has really helped not only help students stay in Maine, but just survive as a student, which is something that I feel like we don't talk about as often. So, yeah.
Thank you. So want to shift a little bit and kind of open the conversation a little bit wider for a minute and ask the panel, what role do you think educational institutions, the government agencies play in supporting the hiring of international students in Maine? Because none of us can do it alone. We need all of this community support. So I wanted to ask you all kind of, what role do you think education and policy and government play in that, knowing I have someone here from the government talk. So maybe we'll start with you, because we know you're already doing it, but why do you think it's so important? What are other things that can happen? What role do you think that you can play?
Well, speaking for myself, because I don't know who the government worker is here. I don't know who that is.
No idea. No legal advice, no government workers. Got it.
Absolutely not. But thinking, from my own experience of working with so many young people over these past almost 10 years of working with young people ages 16 to 24, and just seeing the wealth of knowledge and honestly, the connection and community and the self-realization for young people, that when you are a part of your community and you are giving in whatever way that may be, whether it's you're doing tutoring for a younger generation, maybe you are participating in workforce, maybe you are mentoring, whatever it may be, this means so much for young people to see themselves in other folks within their community. And thinking from a standpoint of what needs to be done is that sense of belonging. I will always, always go back to that sense of belonging. As somebody who was born and raised here in Maine and left and came back and left and came back, and I think I left one more time and then I came back one more time. And then for the most part, I've stayed. I have. But really the thing that kept bringing me back was that sense of belonging. I have community here in everywhere from York County all the way up to Aroostook County, all the way out to Piscataquis County, and everywhere in between. I have those pockets of feeling that belonging. And when young people see that in folks who they work with, and they see that in the businesses that they're interacting with, they have that sense of belonging. And so what our charge, I don't know who the government people are again, and I don't know who the, legal people are again, but really it's to find that sense of belonging, and how do we help to cultivate that, keep that, grow that, and make sure that that maintains for generations to come. I'm a huge believer in, having those organic moments of the business coming in and starting to work with mock interviews with young people. And, our first mock interview never goes well. And I will tell you that from experience. My first mock interview, I left crying, and, we have made it somewhere else since then. But I had to have that experience, but then to have that mentor that said, okay, so that seemed like it was really hard. And I was like, yeah, that was really hard. I don't want to do that again. And they're like, well, let's just bring it back. And for them to bring me resources, for them to give me tools, for them to continue to come to my school, to then sponsor my soccer team, even though I didn't actually play because I was that bad. But they still wanted to do that. They were a part of my K-8 time here. And I really, really latched onto that. And that business really made a huge difference for me. Again, from that point A of doing my first terrible mock interview all the way to me feeling like I've moved out of Maine for the 5th time. Should I come back? And then I'm like, well, there's Greg. So, I think I'm going to come back for that sense of community. And that makes a huge difference. So that's our charge, whoever it may be, is to help cultivate that sense of belonging.
Clap for that. Slapping for that. Definitely, I think that schools and institutions play a really huge role in continue hiring and bringing more diversity in our state. And I think just going back to that first point of being intentional about that, and reducing obstacles that might be in the way of allowing people to come and live here. And really just, I love that. I don't want to talk too much about, because you said it so beautifully about that idea of belonging. It plays a really huge role in sustaining diversity and students here in our state. I grew up on Congress Street in Portland, where, you know, nobody looked like me when when I first came here as a 13-year-old going to high school. This, you know, Black woman with her hijab on, like, who just walking down Congress Street felt so awkward because I just didn't feel like I belonged in this community and in Maine. And growing up in my neighborhood, nobody knew each other's names. And to me, that was a problem, because in Sudan and in Cairo, Egypt, where I grew up, I knew all my neighbors and they all knew me, especially if I got in trouble, they really knew me. Yeah, so growing up on Congress Street and not being able to know my neighbors and not having my neighbors know my family, that created an obstacle for me. So as someone who, you know, is a fighter, I went around my neighbors, I knocked on doors, I introduced myself, I brought food that I'm sure they didn't eat, but I'm like still knocking on the door to just kind of break that ice of that this is my community here, and there's so many issues that we do, and those issues are not going to get done alone. So how? Oh, okay. Nothing happened. Talking about issues, you can be able to solve them alone, but being able to create a sense of a community that, you know, you can count on, in good times and in bad times, in fighting all the big obstacles that we have together. It's not going to be done alone. So just wanted to emphasize more that institutions and schools really play a huge role in providing a platform to create community, because I think essentially that's what's going to help.
I think the schools also do a lot to help students, no matter what status they're in, give them the information that empower them to advocate for themselves with their employers or with future employers and say, look, yes, I am a foreign national. Yes, there's a teeny tiny bit of paperwork that you might have to fill out to hire me, but that's right, that's it. And I think that the schools can really do a lot to help those students feel like they can make their, you know, their case. With regard to the government's role, I have probably the most complicated relationship with the government, but you know, there's policies change all the time, and I think we're all kind of looking to see what's going to happen with this year's election, and hopefully it won't be too different, and we'll be able to kind of continue with a little bit more of the certainty that we've seen under this administration that we did not see under the prior administration.
And then I love the piece about like building community and building belonging. So thank you for that. And then I was thinking maybe a role that schools could have is helping all the students, international students too, with the preparation to go in the job search. For example, internationally, it's very, very normal for us to put our picture and our date of birth and basically my Colombian ID. Like I used to put all kinds of information, personal info, my address, all kinds of things. And that was a normal thing for me to put on my resume. But it turns out when we come here, resumes look very different. So I think providing, as if you're an educational institution, providing those resources to, okay, let's do a resume workshop. And if you're an employer, when the educational institution invites you to go to the resume workshop, you go. Like you just say, yes, tell me when and where, I'll be there, basically. So more about kind of those even preparation of like how to be prepared for the interview and how to do like these things to really show what you have. And yes, just remove the picture from your resume and remove your date of birth from your resume, because that is not relevant here, and it's illegal for employers to hire you based on how you look, on how old you are. So having that knowledge, I still get resumes with pictures and like, oh, that's too much information. I did not need that much. I just need to know how to contact you, literally. That's it. So yeah.
It is complicated and as you said, like I still get resumes like that. You still get resumes like that. But also being able to step back and say, these students are doing what is the norm for them and owning that on your side that's like this is the norm for them. Just because it's not the norm for us doesn't mean that it's wrong, right? Like they're doing everything that they think is right. And so I think there's some ways that we can open our eyes and I think there's a lot of frontline recruiters, probably even in this room, who can help kind of manage that or take pieces off a resume that don't need to be there before it moves on and kind of help shape a few things. So thank you for that. This has been great conversation so far, and I do want to get to some audience questions, as I'm sure that some of you have some about what you can be doing in your offices, in your organizations, questions that might come up, ideas that you might have. So please get those ready because we do want to have that shared. But wanted to go back a little bit to that sense of belonging piece, and we've talked about it a bunch, but I also really just want to ask again kind of what you've seen work. What's your like best hits list for people in terms of like, these are things that really work. Like there's a lot of things you can do, but like, here's what really works with a student that I've worked with. That kind of.
That's a really good question. Because it's so different each time and with each business, but I think one of my like top two things that I find really help and that I really try to work with employers, organizations, community-based organizations on is when you're welcoming somebody from a different community within your community. You have work to do first. You have to do work first, and it can't be because you're trying to have an international student be a part of your community. You have to have been proactively doing this work before. So starting with some of those key pieces of, hey, we're doing a hiring recruitment effort for international students, and we want to learn about different types of food around the world, and how this plays into how we build community. We are going to learn about different languages of how to say hello, how are you? We are going to do X, Y, and Z things proactively months, weeks. I'm really hoping it's years before some of the recruitment efforts are happening, but really trying to instill within our community members who are bringing new community members in is that you're doing this work so much beforehand. It could be X, Y, and Z things, but making sure that that's proactively happening and continuing is the second part. It's not okay, we've done this particular thing to make sure that this particular member of our community is feeling that sense of belonging. It's continuing that, because you're always going to be welcoming somebody. You're always going to be welcoming a new face. You're always going to be welcoming a new culture within your business. And knowing that we have these pieces that we're working on, and knowing that we're starting this early and continuing this in every fabric of what we're doing, it really becomes a part of the culture and the DNA and the bloodstream really of an organization, a business, an employer, and how that may happen. So starting that, continuing it, and you're always going to find a new way to welcome somebody, and it's always going to benefit everybody.
Kate, you look like
Yeah,
you're excited to jump in.
I love that. And I think, tying it in from a business perspective and recruiting you guys want their best talent, right? And I think once you have that kind of culture where you are welcoming and you hire your first foreign national and they're like, wow, this employer is so welcoming and they're sponsoring me, eventually when I need sponsorship, they're sponsoring me. They're going to get me through the green card process. That goes a long way. I mean, once these networks are connected, they all talk. I mean, unfortunately, right now, have a client who has decided they're not going to sponsor green cards right now. It's a mass exodus, and they are going to have trouble recruiting for years to come. So once you have that community and that welcoming, and you start the process, I think the benefits just accrue. You start getting amazing talent, you start diversifying your workforce, and then all of the amazing things that we're talking about here, it all snowballs in the best way.
Absolutely. And on top of that too, thinking about if you're working with young people within like the high school age range, seeing that early for young people can make such a huge difference instead of waiting until we're taking that massive leap post high school, really not cutting ties, but really losing a huge safety net that you've had for all of these years and you're out on your own. And if you're able to cultivate that even with an extended learning opportunity, you know, like within a classroom, maybe you're making a specific module for young people to explore something within your industry, but doing that earlier and having that time, that face time with that young person at an earlier time, and that they see you're putting in this effort when they're 16, 17, 18 years old, when they're ready to apply for that job, they say, hey, Greg has had this job open for a little bit. I've known Greg since I was a sophomore. I should just go over and say, hey. And Greg's like, hello, how are you in your language? Let me welcome you into this community. And they know that this is a safe person. And within the high school world, the young person likely has a supportive adult with them. So maybe it's an extended learning opportunities coordinator. Maybe it is somebody who is a workforce development specialist. Maybe it is somebody who's from VR, but they have that support system and they have almost that navigator for them. And they can continue that relationship and they continue building that sense of belonging with that supportive adult. So you can also help to gain that trust with that supportive adult to continue that welcoming and to continue that work that you're doing within your organization. And the earlier this happens, I mean, I want preschoolers to feel really comfortable coming into BIW, being like, well, what are jobs here? You know, like we want this. And so the earlier we can do this for young people, truly the better. I really don't want young people to be on the yard though, but you know, we want to make sure that everybody sees that this could be a possibility for them. And I want, you know, for those who are thinking, okay, so what may be that first step? That first step is realizing what may not be happening right now, and then taking that first leap to say, hey, let me reach out to the Multicultural Center of, you know, the local high school and see how I can get involved. Maybe it's providing mealtime, maybe it is just providing cultural books, whatever it may be, but taking that time to do it.
Yes, absolutely. I think if for me, especially if you guys take anything from our talk or from my talk today, it's exactly that. It's starting as early as possible because as I was saying in my introduction earlier, I started teaching in high school and then I went on to middle school and I just see it in doing intervention at a very young age. What does that do to a young person, right? And like how that makes them want to stay and fight for their community that they have cultivated here instead of going to anywhere else, Boston, New York, wherever it is. And sponsoring, I when I was in high school, there was a lot of people that sponsored the Model UN that I was a part of. And Model UN was a huge factor of who I am today as a person, being able to research other countries and being able to defend that country and being able to learn from other students who were learning about the world. It wasn't just about me. I had Djibouti, for example. I learned so much about that country. I was like, I'm a citizen of this country. And to be able to just have those experiences that cultivated belonging for me was really awesome. So having, you know, being able to, if you're not working with high schools or with colleges, but being able to sponsor it has a very long effect. I had another moment. I had another thought that just went away. Maybe it'll come back. Maybe it'll come back, but I'll pass the mic.
Diana, anything you want to?
There was just one thing that I wanted to share. Like, I love, yes, huge fan of the pre-work and starting early and being proactive. But if you do happen to have an international student on board this summer or whenever, spend time with them. Like literally just sit down with them and spend time with them. It's totally selfish, but the one thing I'm taking from these interactions is that I have never physically been to Japan or Bhutan or Bangladesh or Ethiopia or Honduras or Nicaragua. I've never physically been there, but I have been there when I've talked, like after talking to them, I have met their parents, I have met their houses, I have met their communities, I have eaten the things that they have eaten. I have never physically done it, but just having dinner with them and or lunch or breakfast, whatever meal of preference, but just sitting down and just giving 2 hours of just conversation and getting to know that, oh, it's been beautiful. And now I really want to go actually get on a plane and go there. But it's just about that huge cultural knowledge that they bring, that they allow me to explore from their perspective. So yeah, I've never been there, but I have been there.
Absolutely. It came back to me, guys. So that's a good thing. And if USM is here in the audience, that's the point I wanted to make, was that a couple of weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago, I went to the USM Cultural Fest as a part of just hosting an event that was for students alone. Like, we were the professors were there, educators were there, but it was their event. They really got to showcase their food, they got to showcase their music, they got to showcase storytelling. They were able to tell stories from home. And to me, that was just a really beautiful thing to be a part of and to witness, and to have an institution like the University of Southern Maine to provide that for their students, and how that has made them feel closer to their school, but also closer to home in a way that I think was so much needed, especially for international students that just are homesick all the time, which is an aspect that we don't talk about enough. But just having being so far away from home and what that does to an individual is not easy. So cultivating more spaces like that, where students can, wear their cultural dressing, bring their cultural food, tell stories of where they come from, I think is very essential in belonging.
I feel like you've heard a theme throughout this whole time, but definitely in the last few minutes around investment.